Hey everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is Dan Lizette, and what you're about to hear is episode 99. I had a great conversation with two of the producers from CBC's Love Me, one of my favorite news shows, and I think that you'll really enjoy this conversation. I spoke with the two producers of the show, Mira, Burt, Wintonick, and Cristal, Duhaime, and it was a great conversation. We were all over Skype, so a little bit of sound issues here and there. I did my best to take care of them, and hopefully it does not impact the conversation. So I hope that all of you enjoy this. And I want to let you know that coming up next will be episode 100. It will be a very special episode for me, obviously representing a huge milestone for the Podcast Digest. And it will feature a lot of my takeaways from Podcast Movement. Podcast Movement was my first national podcasting convention. I learned a lot, had a great time, and even had a chance to grab a few of the podcasters I spent a lot of time with there on the show floor to talk a little bit about their experiences as well. So I'll be bringing all that to you in episode 100. But because this is such a big deal, really for any show, hitting episode 100 is a thing, right? I mean, it matters. It is a big number, and it matters to me. When I started the show in September of 2014, I had no clue this would actually last 100 episodes, and it did. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to check this out, sharing the show with friends, giving me feedback, shooting emails to the show, the podcast digest at gmail.com. A lot of you have reached out and told me about shows that you love, or submitted on the form on the website that allows each and every one of you to tell me what you're listening to and what you think I should be checking out. And all of that. I've got, a few of you are so kind as to support me on Patreon. That link's in the show notes every week as well. And the iTunes reviews, there's been a number of those as well. I just want to say, as I cross the 100 border here in a few days with episode 100 release, that if you do enjoy the Podcast Digest, or if you enjoy any show, and upcoming in my conversation with Cristal and Mira, you're going to hear me talk about that if you enjoy the work that they do with Love Me, there's apparently a question on if there'll be a season 2. Love Me is one of the best shows out there, and I think that if you're a podcast listener, you really need to take just a few moments to let the producers and the creators and the hosts of these shows know that you like their work. Almost everything you listen to is free and in your earbuds, every week or every 2 weeks or whatever the case may be. And all of us love delivering that entertainment or that information to you. But a quick email, or more importantly, in a lot of cases, an iTunes review, really, 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 really helps the show. I've got any number of downloads and any number of you following me on social media, but only a very small portion of people have left that iTunes review. It only takes a couple minutes, folks, and whether it be for my show or Love Me or any of my previous 100 shows I've talked about with great creators and guests, I just want to say, as I cross this episode 100 here in a few days with my next episode, if I have one message to come away from all this, is that support the hosts and creators and producers of the work that you love. And you can do that by letting them know, sharing the show, reviewing the show, or even next level stuff like Patreon. It really matters. This is still in some ways a nascent industry, and it's still trying to grow and get its legs underneath and become a really big deal that I believe it will be. And it takes all of you who are listening to kind of stand up and say, this is a medium I enjoy. This is quality content and entertainment that I really would prefer not to do without. So please let your voice be heard and support those creators and hosts and producers who do the work that you love. So with that, I'm going to get out myself that crazy soapbox I just hopped on. But thought it was necessary, and it really kind of hopped to my head. One, because I'm approaching 100, but two, because of my conversation with Cristal and Mira from CBC's Love Me. And that's coming up right now. So without further delay, let's talk to these two great women doing amazing work with a podcast that you all just need to subscribe to, like right now. Trust me. Here it is. Hello, Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is episode 99. My name's Dan Lizette. Thanks for coming back and joining me. This is my first True Blue interview post-podcast movement in Chicago. So I mentioned to a few of you folks listening right now that I was really looking forward to this future conversation, and it is a fairly new show, but I think I'm safe in calling it a phenomenon, if you will. It has really done well in iTunes, and I've become a huge fan very quickly, and the producers of the show actually reached out to me early to let me know that this was coming. So I was able to jump on since episode 1, and it only took a few weeks of releases before I knew I really wanted to talk to folks from this show. And I'm very fortunate this week on episode 99 to be joined by the two producers of Love Me. So Mira, Burt, Wintonick, and Cristal Duhaime, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining me, ladies. And I'm super excited to talk about this show because I think it's done really, really well. At least it has a lot of critical acclaim in my Twitter feed. It's
hard to tell if it's just ours because our friends are being nice to us or if it's actually resonating out there.
It seems like it is. And we've got a lot to talk about with the show because I really want to kind of know how this whole thing comes together. But before we jump into that, I'd like folks to get to know a little bit about the two of you, especially because primarily the two of you are not always front and center on Love Me. So, Mira, let's start with you. Tell folks a little bit about your background and sort of your personal story leading up to the launch of the show.
Sure. Well, I studied sound production in university, which is where I met Cristal. And while I was there, I got an internship on a little show called Wiretap, which was at the time in its second season. And so I had the privilege of working with Jonathan Goldstein, the creator and host of that great CBC show. So I was really excited about it and I learned so much. And then very soon after became a producer and eventually senior producer of the show and with Jonathan. And along the way, we brought Cristal into the team. And we had a 10-year run there with Wiretap and just ended last year. And so that's kind of where I spent my entire career pretty much actually was producing Wiretap.
So I'm going to ask Cristal this same question in just a second, Mira, but Wiretap was such a long-running show. What were sort of some of the highlights for you? Like, what were some of the high points, maybe a couple of favorite episodes or favorite experience in helping put that whole thing together?
Well, it's funny. It's when you're working on a weekly show, I feel like you kind of forget what you produced the week before just because you're always gearing up for the following week. So it's like you're working on it so hard, and then as soon as it's out there, it's out of your mind, and you almost forget what just happened. But I mean, it was just such a treat to work with Jonathan, and we had the pleasure of being able to blend fact and fiction on that show in a really pretty unique way. And it made us kind of a little, it was just like a very liberating experience, right? To be able to kind of blur those lines and make things up and talk to real people, but also invent characters. And we really had kind of a free range of what we were able to do on that show. We didn't feel too confined by any particular styles or aims, and we're really able to experiment with a lot of different approaches and ideas. So it's kind of like a really great place to kind of spend our time and really try things out.
And Cristal, how about you? What's a little of your backstory and your Wiretap experience?
Yeah, so like Mira said, we both met in university, and my focus was more on sound design for film. Had grand ideas that I would become like the next Walter Murch or something and work on all these art films. And I did work in television post-production for a few years after university, but I think I quickly realized that sound in film and television is most always an afterthought. And so basically I was just cleaning up a lot of bad audio most of the time. And when Mira had proposed that I join the Wiretap team, I hadn't really thought about radio before, but then it dawned on me that, like radio is sound. So you can really like put all of your energy into something creative right away. Whereas with TV and film, it would probably have taken me years and years to get to the level that I wanted, that I would have been able to do anything creative. So, and then I was a part-time producer on Wiretap for 9 years. And I think it was interesting because I think Mira and I both brought Mira was also interested in film sound design in university. And I think we both kind of brought those ideas to Wiretap. And we were really able to create some some fun scenarios on radio with our sound design techniques. So we kind of blended the two a little bit.
And I'm going to be linking into the show notes, folks, I'm going to use the term article. Correct me if that's wrong, Mira. Something I found on CBC's website on the doc project, where you had talked a lot about sort of some of the storytelling and the use of sound. And I was hoping, before we jump into Love Me, if you kind of sort of retell a little bit of this awesome story, kind of a big highlight of the video that's attached to this article, about how you had a broken studio with a horrible recording and you ended up picking up the whole thing and setting it in a fictional diner. Because I think it's really amazing to sort of, a lot of podcasters listen to this show, folks, and a lot of them may find themselves in this situation where they didn't like how something initially came out. Tell folks, using a lot of what you both have sort of been trained in, use your experience in producing for Wiretap, on how you made this happen.
Right. So this is, there was one time on Wiretap where we were recording this sort of a fake advice show where he'd gathered people into the studio to give advice to these mostly real messages that listeners had called in and left with questions asking for advice. And the studio, there was like construction next door, and like the miking, there was some feedback in the mics, and just like everything was going wrong, but we had a very limited time, so we weren't able to fix any of the technical issues while we were recording. And when we listened back to the tape afterwards, it was just really horrible sound and not something we would normally have wanted to air. But because we, we're producing in this kind of very free kind of framework where we weren't, 100% committed to truth and authenticity and accuracy, and we weren't in some journalistic context, we decided to pretend that the entire episode had been recorded live at Hazar's Deli, which was a deli that we made up, that, this kind of diner. And we actually like layered in a sound of restaurants and people eating in the background, and actually then wrote some interruptions throughout the advice giving, where like the waiter would come up, or where there was Jonathan would read these little ads for the matzo ball soup that was on special that week, and it just made the episode actually way better than it ever would have been. But it was all from this accidental, terrible recording. And the ability of playing with sound after the fact and adding these sound design elements to just otherwise like a dry studio recording.
So call me crazy here, but this sounds like something that would take a lot of time. But you mentioned sort of a time crunch. Was this sort of like late nights, all night, trying to figure out how to make this happen? It sounds like it would take a while to kind of set this up.
Well, you can do a lot with, some pretty basic elements, background sounds, a few sound effects here and there. And it's crazy what the listener's mind will fill in the blanks for you. If we got listeners calling in saying, "Oh, where is that deli? I've never heard of it. I want to go check it out." And, we had completely made it up, but they hear the sound of clinking glasses and knives and forks, and their mind imagines this visual of a restaurant, and they see it in their head. And, it doesn't take much to put in that little bit of effort to take them there.
I love that story. I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because of this. And this whole write-up, folks, this whole article, if you are a podcaster of any sort, but especially if you're interested in, documentary style or any form of storytelling, or want to integrate sound in any more significant way, please check out this link that I'm going to include in the show notes. I read this and I was like, this is really good stuff here, especially coming out of Chicago and podcast movement, as I recently did. This, I feel like you should have had a panel here, Mira. Like you should have had a session on this whole, deal.
Sound design.
Yeah, I think it's great. So Wiretap, all this experience, all this wonderful stuff that happened here eventually led to the creation of Love Me. And I want to go way back to the beginning, and this is for either one of you. How did this idea gestate? Was this sort of something in the back of either one of your minds for years, or was this kind of like, okay, Wiretap's coming to an end, what's next? Or talk about the very beginning.
So it started basically with a desire. After Wiretap, we felt a bit lost. What's the next project going to be? How do you follow up something that was that critically acclaimed and also that much fun to work on, and where we had so much freedom? And so we definitely knew we wanted to do something on our own where we would have that same kind of creative control and creative input into a show, rather than just kind of working on another show. And the idea for Love Me actually sort of came out of just a simple desire to talk to real people about their very private lives, just in a kind of snoopy, nosy kind of way. Just the reason I listen to radio personally is because I really crave that intimacy of like just hearing people talk about their personal lives. And so I wanted an excuse to be able to do that and to just ask people personal questions about their relationships and what was really going on. Because, relationships are something that seem very different on the outside than they are on the inside, and you never really know what's going on between two people. And so it started like that. And we also had a desire to do some more fiction. Cristal and I had been collaborating on a lot of fictional pieces in the last few years of Wiretap. And there isn't really a home for them on CBC elsewhere. CBC's radio department shut down 5 years ago. And so there's nowhere to pitch our pieces to if we wanted to write individual scenes or skits or anything like that. So we wanted to create a show where we could combine that interest of like talking to real people about their really personal matters, but also have a home for our fictional pieces that we wanted to write.
Yeah, and in documentary, I think there's something in both forms that is always a little bit missing. So having the two complement each other works really well. We often use either the documentary piece as a jumping off point for a fiction, or it's also worked the opposite way where we have an idea for a fiction piece and then it actually leads us to a nonfiction piece. So I think the two work really well together.
Can we talk just broader about the idea of combining those two? Because I know that was a theme through Wiretap as well as now in Love Me, but I have to admit there are not a lot of shows doing this unless I'm missing some out there. And I think it's a wonderful combination when you just were explaining, Cristal, about kind of how one is a jumping off for another. I'm thinking about the episode 5, Family Portrait, where that was pretty much exactly what happened, and I may get the sequence wrong here, but if I remember correctly, there was a documentary style section leading into sort of a middle segment that was a recreation of a family photo, if you will, and it was great how it all kind of thematically fit around the same type of thing, but it was clear where sort of one was, that first person story, and then one where it was sort of this fictional recreation. Why the motivation to sort of combine these two elements? It works great. I'm just curious because it seems so unique.
I guess, like I was saying, for me at least, I'm not naturally drawn to documentary because I always feel like there's a certain part of it that I want to kind of maybe manipulate and create, just fill in the blanks with my own kind of ideas. And often there's something, I can't explain it really. There's often something missing, where I want to be able to go someplace totally surreal or just take an idea and blow it way out of proportion and see how far you can push it. Obviously when you're doing documentary, you have to adhere to the person's actual story. So you can't just start creating things. So I think it kind of fulfills that desire to just create a world on your own. And with that particular episode, it was kind of a happy accident again, where we had the idea for the fiction first and we had the other stories come in after, and they just kind of happened to fit together quite nicely. And I think in a way, it really, having the fiction after the real story, it kind of provides a new commentary on what you just heard before, and also provides a new preview or introduction to what you hear after, because it's cushioned with two nonfiction pieces. So that episode was a happy accident again.
Yeah, and I think on Love Me is different than Wiretap in that our fiction and nonfiction elements are they're sort of seamless and they flow into each other and complement each other, but they are a little bit more distinct than Wiretap. Wiretap, blurred those lines a lot more fluidly, and kind of you never really knew what was real or not, and we liked playing with that uncertainty. Whereas Love Me, it's usually very clear what is real and what isn't, but it's just providing kind of another either a flipping of a perspective or a pivot point for the story, or like Cristal mentioned, allowing us to kind of delve into a more surreal place.
I have a constant fascination sort of with how of these type of things come together. It's one of the main reasons I started this show. So when some of these stories are amazing and they're so well told, and I'll go to the most recent one. And I'll be honest with you, it was at the time of our recording today. It was only released yesterday, I think, or the day before. Chicago's got my mind spinning. But I was listening to it literally on the way home from the office today, and the last story with the woman and the garbage truck and the man and the priest, and I'm not going to ruin the story, but it just had me mesmerized. And you were talking about sound, and what was funny is I'd already read your article, Mira, so I was really tuned into it on there, and you guys literally dropped the sound at one point, and it was just her speaking, and I thought it was brilliant because it really emphasized when she was sort of telling the story about why she did what she did in her decision making. But I'm kind of wondering, like, how do you find these people? How do these stories sort of surface and come up? You can use one or a different episode as an example, but just generally speaking, how do these stories get made?
Well, most of the stories we got for the show, we got them through the call out that we put out through just social media and through various radio contacts. And the stories just kind of came flooding in. We were really surprised by how personal the stories were and how willing people were to open up to us. But yeah, all the stories basically came to us. I don't think that we really had to seek out any, actually.
Yeah, there was just a couple that we kind of knew through friends that we asked about or, pushed a little bit. But, it's kind of like people are actually just really happy to talk about these very personal things. And they kind of, it's something that people keep private, but at the same time, they're kind of really, they welcome the chance to be able to talk about it and share their experiences and maybe some of their struggles with other people. And like that piece that you mentioned, for example, it was recorded over the phone, and Cristal and I were just talking the other day about how the fact that a lot of the pieces we recorded were either over the phone or were recorded where we weren't in the same room with people. They were actually in other cities, and they're just recorded their end on their own. We got, tape sync, or they were just, but they're still in their own home. Then, we didn't really make anyone go into a studio, and it allowed them to be really just open up in this really comfortable way where they didn't feel kind of like exposed or like in this like professional setting. They're just like talking on the phone in their house, and they're not even necessarily thinking about the fact that it's like this big radio interview or anything. They're just talking as if they're talking to a friend over the phone. So it gets to these really personal and emotional places.
Yeah, and probably this setting allows them to do that opening up. And when you were sitting there talking, Cristal, I was thinking, their willingness to tell these stories. I was thinking to myself, I wonder if they stand in awe themselves of their own story. that concept of, you're not going to believe this, but, and looking at some of the stories throughout the first season, I think a couple of those fit that category. And I wonder if that might be a motivation. But I want to shift gears real quick because we've gone this far, and I think we'd be remiss if we did not mention some of the other important people that are involved with the show, namely the host, Lou, right? I do want to make sure we recognize her contributions to all this. Can you talk about how Lou got involved in this project and sort of how maybe the three of you sort of help make this thing go every week?
Yeah, well, Lou, we actually met last fall at this great audio festival in Ireland called Hearsay, which is set in this like little tiny town. So there's only one restaurant. So, all the radio producers kind of meet up in this space, in this little town all the time. So you get to know people really well. And, sorry, can you hear those sirens?
Yeah, it's okay. As long as they're not coming for you, we're good.
I'll just wait till it. Wow. Okay. Yeah, so we met Lou in Ireland. And then when we were thinking of a host for the show, we were trying to think of somebody that would have just like a very soothing, kind of almost motherly voice that just like would be able to bring their own experiences to the show and not kind of see things through rose-colored glasses all the time, and just like have some real complicated feelings to share. And when we were thinking of hosts, somebody had suggested Lou, and aesthetically her voice, I mean, we both really love her pieces and her work, and she has this great delivery style. And we did a quick audition with her, and she told this story that she shared on I guess it would have been the first episode of the show, where she can't bring herself to tell her mother that she loves her when she ends a phone call with her. And when we were doing the audition, we were doing it over the phone, and Mira and I were just like leaning into the phone almost because we were just kind of hanging on her every word. And we just knew right away that she would be perfect for the show.
Yeah, she's been so generous of just like opening up her heart and soul and bearing it for us as kind of a proxy for us, because neither of us are really like have strong desires to be on the radio or be hosts. We kind of like being behind the scenes. So she's been really amazing to just kind of stand in for this like very vulnerable and personal tone that we wanted to set up.
And Cristal, I think you just answered my next question, which was, again, because I've listened to every episode kind of as they've come out, and I know you guys walk this kind of or flip this switch back and forth between sort of, dramatic and documentary, kind of back and forth. I was wondering, and I'm wondering if anyone else was wondering, was when Lou went first person, were these Lou's stories? But you're saying they are. This is all her own personal sharing in these episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. The stuff that she introduces is all her true story.
I'm wondering if I was just the only one wondering that, or if everyone just bought it at face value. But I was kind of like, I wasn't sure.
Sometimes I wondered about that, like whether from working on Wiretap for so long, whether people trust us anymore about whether what we're doing is real or not. But Love Me, it is pretty clear. Like you should, like you if you're hearing something that feels true, it's probably true. And if you hear something that seems fake, it's fake. But we don't really blur those lines too much.
So at the time of our recording, we are 6 episodes in, and 7 is inbound shortly, yes?
Yes, Monday the 18th.
Right. So, folks, if you're listening to it prior to that, make sure to subscribe and go back through the back catalog, get caught up. It's not serialized or anything like that, but this is a train you need to be on. So we are approaching near the end of season 1, I understand?
Yeah, there's only 8 episodes in season 1. It's short and sweet.
And then there's going to be an uprising of people clamoring for more. Is there going to be a second season?
We hope so.
Yeah, we haven't heard yet.
No official plans, but we would definitely like to do one. And we've been in discussions with CBC about future episodes, depending. We're not sure exactly what form they'll take yet, but hopefully if enough people listen and review us and subscribe, and they'll have no choice but to give us a second season.
Well, that sounds like a viable goal to me. So what has the reception been? I would imagine that a lot of these stories are probably things that hit home from people. Have you guys been hearing from listeners on what their feelings have been like?
Yeah.
People seem to be responding really well to the material. I mean, everyone kind of has similar hardships that they go through in their lives. So I think it's really comforting for people to just hear about other people's problems. And I learned through this experience that like humans are pretty emotionally resilient. They could kind of deal with pretty hard, pretty difficult things. And I hope a lot of listeners take that away with them as well when they're listening to the show, and gives them like the incentive to kind of move forward with their own difficult relationships.
Yeah, we've got a lot of feedback from people too that say like that somehow they find something in each episode that they relate to, even though each episode deals with a very different kind of relationship. So it's not all romantic relationships. There's familial relationships, there's father-son relationships, there's, friendships. But there's something, the way we try to present the stories is making them kind of universal enough that they'll touch you even if you haven't experienced that particular thing, and it'll kind of resonate with some other relationship that you might have in your life.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, if not you, probably someone feeling, I think, for a lot of listeners. I think that was definitely the case as I was listening along as each episode was released. Some of them, the episode 1 with Google Translate. Okay, I've never met somebody through Google Translate, but I could imagine a situation where, I knew a friend from another country who had, come here, and what maybe that experience would have been like had Google Translate even been a thing, say 15 years ago when he got here. But
or just any miscommunication, right? Like we've all had relationships where we just have a horrible miscommunication at some point that leads to some like ridiculous or disastrous affair.
So just to kind of jump back to that, since I just brought it up here, I kind of want to know, how did that episode come from a production standpoint? That seemed like it would be maybe a little difficult to put together, because you guys included almost, you had sort of sound from the app or the service in there, kind of going back and forth. When you guys are putting an episode like that together, what's that process like?
Well, that was funny episode in that, so that was one where the idea for a fiction came first, and then we found the true story of Mac and Nico. So I was actually in a relationship at the time, a long distance relationship with an Italian man, and I knew a little bit of Italian, but obviously for the more complex things, I would still resort to Google Translate. So I just thought it would be very interesting to find a way to do a fiction where there's a romantic relationship at stake, and both people in the couple are relying on this instrument to kind of help them get to connect. But when Mira and I discussed it would have been impossible to have it be from a foreign language to English, just because the show is in English. So we were thinking, no, that would entail like 2 translation tracks. It would be really, really messy. So eventually we, what's the next step, Mira? I guess.
So then we were actually going to try to find a way to write it. But while I was Googling something to research ideas to inspire the fiction, then I ended up finding a story, like an article that Mac, the true character, had written about an actual true experience. And then I sent it to Cristal, and she's like, "Oh, sounds interesting. Let's talk to her." And then her story was so interesting, and she was such a great storyteller. We ended up just recording the true story instead of writing the fiction, and then that true story inspired a different fiction, which is like the robot conversation that you hear at the end. So it was like fiction inspiring fact inspiring fiction.
Which is Love Me in a nutshell, isn't it? I thought it was a great episode and a great way to sort of launch the season. It was, again, something I think was very different and not something that's typically heard. And I think that's one of the things I think that, and this is I'm an avid podcast listener at this point, and Love Me really stood out from Jump Street with that episode 1, and I knew I was in from the ride from that point. So folks, if you've not gotten on this bandwagon yet, do it. Let's go even more macro if we can. I love the title, right? Especially because the whole kind of tagline is about the messiness of human relationships, and that title sort of fits in that. Curious, kind of, did you guys workshop this thing? Were there other kind of second or third place runner-up title choices, or how did you guys settle on the choice of the show title?
It's funny because so when I wrote the pitch for the show, the working title I had in there was Love Me, and Cristal never really got on board with it. She was kind of, felt like, I mean, it is it connotes a kind of whiny, like pathetic, needy, aspect of a personality, but that's what I kind of liked about it, because it is such a relatable feeling, even if we don't want to admit it. Like, you have that little desperate voice inside of you that wants to be loved as much as you might want to kind of drown it out. But we thought ultimately it can convey that desperation and neediness in a kind of playful, self-aware kind of way, where it's making fun of itself. It's like, love me, but it's aware that it's like a pathetic thing to be asking and that you would never really say out loud without feeling really embarrassed about. And so we're hoping that it kind of reads that way as something that's kind of playful, like self-mocking in a way, while also being very vulnerable and emotional at the same time.
So Cristal, why not on board so much at first?
Oh no.
In a nutshell.
Well, I guess one thing that was really important to us was that it not seem to people that we were making a dating show. So to me, I think it's very difficult to have anything with love in the title where it doesn't automatically scream that. But I also agree with the interpretation. If it is interpreted in the way that we are intending, I think it's a great title. But yeah, that was my only fear, was that people would probably just see the title and just assume oh, this is another show about dating or finding a mate, which I think, there are a lot of good shows that are doing that, but we just didn't want it to be another one like that. We wanted to cover a range of relationships. So I was just fearful that it would communicate that we were doing a dating show is all.
Well, I think as soon as they start with episode 1, that should go out the window. At least they would consider a non-traditional dating show using Google Translate.
Right. You lose anecdotes, really. Like, we wanted to make sure that each episode has a balance. So there's, even though if one story is about dating, there'll be another story about, a mom and daughter relationship or something else to complement it. Which
is funny because episode 2, a 1970s dating game show.
Yes.
One of the things we haven't really I mentioned briefly earlier, and I'm wondering, let's live in a perfect world for a second, ladies, because I want to live in a world where I assume we will see season 2 of Love Me. During season 1, you guys threw in a bonus, which I thought was super cool because it's a lot of what I do here, where the two of you joined Lou and you kind of talked about how sort of the previous episode came together. Do you imagine, assuming there's a season 2, that maybe in the interim we might have a few more bonuses, maybe a couple sort of shorter episodes? Is that something you guys may consider?
We actually have another project we're embarking on very shortly, so I'm not sure we might have to put Love Me on pause for a little brief hiatus while we take care of that, but I don't know. Nothing's, if the crowds demand it and swarm CBC buildings demanding for more episodes, we might consider it.
Yeah, we definitely have had a few ideas left over from the season that we still wanted to try out, especially short fictions. So hopefully, if we get a season 2, we'll try them out.
Is it possible to speculate, assuming, again, there's a season 2, is this a fall or early 17, or is that not even at the discussion point yet?
Probably wouldn't be before 2017, just because we do have another a fiction project that we're working on in the next couple months. So, should
we or can we talk about that or no?
I believe we can. It's with Howl, which is Howl.fm. Yeah, and it's going to be a purely fiction series, which is going to be just based on just writing, like some fictional writing that we're going to do. So it won't be the same as Love Me with like any documentary elements or anything like that.
Will be one of those exclusive to subscribers?
We're hoping we're going to make sure that a few of the episodes are available outside of the subscription model as well, just to kind of bring people to hear the full series. It'll be a short 6-part series, but yeah, we're going to make sure to have a couple of the episodes available elsewhere. But yeah, we have to figure all of that stuff out.
This is a perfect follow-up, and I'm not sure if either one of you had heard my most recent episode, just released a couple of days ago at the time of this recording, but I spoke with Matt Gorley from I Was There Too, member of Earwolf, and involved in Howl, and him and I talked about Howl a bit, about its growth and some of the shows out there. He's actually involved in a lot of sort of the content acquisition for both Earwolf and Howl, so we had a little discussion on that piece, so this is kind of a nice follow-up to that conversation I had with Matt about what Earwolf and Midroll are doing with Howl. So that's great that you guys will be pushing something out there with Howl as well.
Yeah, it's such a fun place. Like they're trying out a lot of different things, and they seem to have like a real range of offerings, which is appealing. And so we're excited to be working with them.
Excellent. Well, I want folks to check out Love Me, and I want folks to definitely to review Love Me and to tell both of these ladies that you love what they're doing, because I do, which is why I really wanted to have Mira and Cristal join me on the show. So one of you, either one, tell folks where they can find Love Me, check it out, subscribe, and leave that review.
So our website is cbc.ca/loveme, and there's a subscription link to the show on the website, and you could also leave a review in iTunes.
And there are Twitter ways people can find out what's going on as well, yes?
Yeah, people could follow us on Twitter. I guess maybe you could put some links up at your website, and you can follow Cristal or me, that's Mira, or Lou, and we'll respond to any questions. And you can also, we have a web, oh yeah, she's at the website already. We have an email address if anyone wants to ever get in touch, loveme@cbc.ca.
Yeah, if anybody has any good stories that they want to pitch for season 2, if we get one,
yeah,
we will be happy to read them.
Absolutely. And I just want all of you to check out Love Me. If you've not heard it yet, I don't know why. You're definitely missing out. And when you do, leave that iTunes review, because for some reason, if season 2 is still a discussion, we need to make sure that that discussion ends real soon and this becomes a foregone conclusion. So let's leave those reviews for Cristal and Mira and Lou and let CBC know. Bring them back. We need to do this. So.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, Cristal and Mira, thank you very much for taking the time to join me. Folks, as you know, all those links will be in the show notes. And it's been a pleasure, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And folks, that will do it for episode 99 of the Podcast Digest. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but soon episode 100 will be out, and that, as you folks know, will be my full-on post-show wrap-up of Podcast Movement. I recorded a few on-the-floor interviews that I'll be featuring as well, and I can't wait to bring it to you. So until then, my name's Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.